If you realize that you have screwed up, one of the strongest things you can do as a person is just admit, I didn't get this one right. I'm going to try harder the next time.
But I am the world's biggest super fan.
Hey, superfans, Freddy D here. In this episode 198, we're joined by John Cobb, and we're diving into a challenge that can quietly derail even the strongest service-based businesses: how to grow through high-stakes moments without losing trust, stability, or control. Too often, founders and leadership teams scale faster than their systems, governance, and the culture can support. From his work across frontier and emerging markets to founding Fullest Advisory, John brings a grounded global perspective on risk mitigation, cultural transformation, and resilient leadership. If you want to strengthen your internal trust, put practice safeguards in place, and scale with more confidence, this conversation gives you a clear path forward. Welcome, John, to the Business Superfans, the Service Provider's Edge podcast. Great conversation that we had before we started recording. Welcome from Lima, Peru, former AZ individual down in Tucson. I'm up here in the northern Phoenix area. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Freddie.
So tell us a little bit. I mean, you've got an interesting background of where you're working with different companies around the world. And how did that come about? What's the backstory? Give us the scoop on how did you create this type of business where you're working with a multitude of different companies in different places and helping them get their business in order so that they can scale and grow across the globe.
So it started for me when I was just a really little kid. I've always been fascinated with other cultures, and my parents growing up, they were very supportive of me exploring the world and meeting new people. They'd take me to whatever nationality restaurant that I wanted to try when I was a kid. I remember them taking me to Ethiopian and Greek food and different ones. Serbian food I've had, Armenian food. They were always good at supporting me with that. And then that later blossomed into me wanting to travel more around the world. And I studied abroad in Mexico when I was in college. And that was a wonderful experience. I got to see most of the country. I visited 28 of the 30 states in Mexico just because they had that cheap and affordable bus fare. And my parents would also pay for foreign language lessons too. So I studied Turkish for a while and I studied Swahili for a bit, just different things to practice and whatnot. And I got my degree from Seton Hall University, International Relations and Diplomacy. And when you have that degree, you basically only have two choices. You either become a diplomat or you go into some sort of international business. And I'm too unstructured to be a government bureaucrat. I have a hard time waking up in the morning on a set schedule. And I'm kind of just like a cat. I show up when I want to and I do work when I want to. So it's best for me to work with businesses.
Wow, what a interesting backstory. And we have some similar backgrounds because I was, as we mentioned before we started recording, I was born in France. Except that when I came to the United States, I was only 2 months old. So they stuck a pacifier in me and said, "You're going." And it was a totalitarianism environment, even though I was screaming. But I was fortunate that once I got about 5, 6 years old, I remember going back and spending my summers at my grandfather's house, which was just outside of Bordeaux. He had a vineyard and taught me a little bit about vineyards and stuff like that. I was fascinated because it was completely night and day culture-wise from Michigan, where I grew up in the Detroit metro area, to being out in the country on vineyards and everything else and watching people on mopeds driving around, and it was just completely different. I was fascinated with it. The other thing that I really remember was the family would get together on Sundays and we would be at some uncle's house or some niece's house or whatever, and everybody would come together. They'd all drive and we'd have a big lunch and everybody would hang out as a family. And those things, when I look back, really formulated some of my outlook on a lot of different things today.
Oh no, absolutely. Family is just so important. You don't get to pick your family really, but they play an outsized impact on your life and how you see things. And if I didn't have parents that were so supportive of me traveling, like I mentioned previously, when I went and studied in Mexico, that was during the height of the drug war, during the Calderon administration. And so they were seeing news stories about bodies being strung from overpasses and everything. And as a parent now, I understand what that must have been like. I have a 3-year-old, and imagining him growing off in another country, even being a bit older, is just something that a lot of parents just wouldn't be able to accept. They really showed me how I could engage meaningfully with the world, and they always supported me when I had ideas for different businesses and everything. I also remember too that in the States, it's not really very common to sell soda on the side of the street like you see in Latin America usually. But I had a soda stand, and I started being an entrepreneur at the age of 6. So I saved up to buy my first video game by selling soda.
Wow. So yeah, you were an
So
entrepreneur way back in the beginning, all the way through. I didn't go that route. I mean, I did have a janitorial business in my late teens for a little bit, but then I got in the computer industry in the very beginning and I went down that route. But once I got myself into global sales and traveling around the world, dealing with different cultures and different businesses, you really need to learn to adapt yourself to the culture and really make an effort to understand and respect where they're coming from, because at the end of the day, people are people and language isn't really a barrier at the end of the day.
I would say language does complicate things a little bit. Just by my wife is Peruvian, and she has different ways of phrasing things than I would as an American. Like English works on a continuum of things not being concretely defined. Like things are always in process when we're speaking English. We're never using the simple past. But in Spanish, they use the simple past quite a bit. Now in Portuguese, they simplify it even further. So it changes kind of the intent and how you have to frame things to people on that. And you do have to be a little bit more tolerant with that. And even sometimes tense changes can impact a marketing campaign. So language is something you have to be very aware of when you're doing international business.
Yeah, what I meant by what I said is when I was in Japan, all I remember was learning at least one word, which was arigato, which was thank you, which was the most important word that you can learn. And that's something I've always strived to learn in any country that I've gone, is at least to be able to say thank you in their language. But you can still, hand signals and body language and things like that, you can communicate as long as you make an effort. But the bottom line is you really need to study and understand the different cultural differences, because what you may think in the United States is the norm, in some other country, that may actually be something that's insulting, for example. Like looking in the Asian country, you take somebody's business card and you take a look at it and you go, okay, and you put it up aside, that's a complete insult to them, because in their case, you need to really read it. And then if it's somebody that's high up, you need to bow appropriately to recognize that they're a senior level person. So there's a lot of nuances that you've got to understand. And the only way you understand that is by going out and visiting different places and learning about the ins and outs of that particular country.
Absolutely. Language should never be a barrier to travel or learning. The best way to learn is just to go by doing. I've had my fair share of cultural mix ups. And remember, we all start as babies and we don't know anything. And we have to continually learn and improve to understand the systems that we're in.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about what is it that you actually do with the companies that you work with. Share with our listeners. How do you help the companies that you're working with, and what is it that you do to help them get to the goals that they want to accomplish?
I provide many different services, but usually companies start with me through a market entry type service. And what that means is I want to expand in this sort of area, help me grow. And then I can also stay on with the company too and provide more in depth advisory services with them if I enjoy working with a particular client. Some clients are tough to work with. It's good to give respect to everybody, but you have to work with the people that make you happy and feel good about what you're doing. And I've had situations I've had to walk away from some unethical companies. But what Fullest Advisory does, that's my company, Fullest Advisory, is we help them through the full cycle. And with my operational experience, businesses and executives can lean on me in difficult situations.
So expand upon that.
So let's say business faces a crisis. I had a situation where a key vendor was going to pull the plug on a business because of a misunderstanding that occurred. And if the vendor pulled the relationship, the business was going to go under. And it was about an $8 million a year business. So reasonably good sized and everything. But if the vendor went away and the business was completely dependent on the vendor, the business would have had to close. So the executive was freaking out and he calls me and I talk to him. The first thing you do with the people who are in a crisis situation is you just let them listen and you let them get out the emotions because a lot of times the crisis seems a lot worse than it actually is. After you let them process for a little bit, you come up with an action plan. And in this situation, to save the vendor relationship, all we need to do is just reframe the information and provide a little bit more credibility. This particular founder was kind of sloppy with his grammar when he sent emails. He wouldn't capitalize things, and certain individuals just don't have the attention to detail. And when you come across a more analytical type who's working maybe in the risk department or the contract review department, those sort of personalities just clash a bit. And by reframing the communication, the business ultimately avoided the crisis and then lived to see another day.
Yeah, you bring up an important point that I think businesses overlook a lot is the lack of training their teams on the different personality types. Because I want to really emphasize what you mentioned there, because you've got somebody that would be what I would call not a driver, but an expressive personality. In other words, someone that's kind of affluent and they've got the fancy car and everything else, but they don't care about all the details and all that stuff. That's like not for them. And they're communicating to somebody that is an analytical type of a person. Those two don't get along. They're actually the opposites in the quadrant. They're completely the opposites of one another. And so that's going to be an instant clash. Absolutely, like you just said, absolutely correct. It's an instant clash. But now, if they had both of them had some training on the different personality types, then you have okay, you slow it down a little bit because you understand that that's how that person is and it's nothing personal. It's just that approach, and then vice versa. It's the same thing with someone that's a driver personality and someone that's an amiable that makes sure that we got to make sure everybody agrees with this. And a driver's like, boom, we just get this done and go. So you bring up really a strong aspect of how something very little can really become a big thing.
I don't know. The thing is, too, we have to keep in mind is that we need all personality types to be successful. The person who's flashier and more assertive is going to be a naturally better salesman than your person who's going to be analytical. Your analytical person is going to pick up on the details and make sure things function smoothly. And in terms of, in American football terms, your more assertive types is like the quarterback who's all famous and everybody talks about him. But your analytical personalities, they come across as being more of your offensive lineman types that block for the quarterback. Because if you don't have people out there trying to make things smooth for the quarterback or the salesperson, they're just going to get sacked. They're not going to have the success that ultimately they'd have otherwise.
Yeah, and the other thing that you brought up is you had let that supplier vent all their challenges that they were experiencing and why they were looking to terminate the relationship. I remember years ago, my first international company that I worked for was a UK company out of Cambridge. I got the job as Western Regional Director, so I handled all of Western United States. And we had this large little company called HP, and they were really unhappy with the technology. It wasn't working well. They didn't get the support that they were supposed to get, and they were looking to give back in the late 90s a $500,000 worth of computer technology, which back then was a lot of money back then, and today it'd be several million. And I had to go in and see if I could salvage it. So the tech guy flew in from the UK, and him and I are still friends today, decades later. But we went in, and it was horrible. I mean, it was brutal. But I have a philosophy is that I use the example of letting the air out of a balloon. Once you let the air out of the balloon, it's empty. And so I sat back the first day and just let them go and Tony was the guy, and he wanted to interject, and I grabbed him by the shoulder a couple of times and just said, zip it, don't defend, just let them get it out. And he didn't understand it, but I had rank, so it just said, you're not saying a word. Just acknowledge, yes, okay, we take it, take notes, everything else. But once they were done and it was empty, you could see the transformation on them physically because somebody listened, didn't interject, didn't defend, just took the stuff that they said. And then the second day we went, it gave us an opportunity to start reblowing new air into the balloon and start blowing it up with positive stuff. And by the end of the second day, we weren't talking about taking the equipment back. We were talking about them buying more stuff. Because again, like you mentioned, once it's empty, the balloon is empty, it's over.
Oh, exactly. Another thing too is some people have a tendency to get defensive, right? They say, oh, they're always on their guard. They're kind of like getting ready to, I don't know, hire their lawyer or something and just defend themselves as much as possible. People don't like that. And if you realize that you have screwed up, one of the strongest things you can do as a person is just admit, I didn't get this one right. I'm going to try harder the next time. And a lot of times, too, especially when dealing with customers, like you mentioned, when you screw up and reframe it positively and make it right for the customer, they remember that. And it's implanted in their brain saying, hey, this guy actually cares about me and I'm going to keep shopping with him. It's like you have a bad meal at a restaurant. The owner comes out and comps your meal that's saying to you, hey, we didn't get it right this time, but please trust us again. And the worst thing that you can do is just kind of ignore bad customer feedback like that because the customer has a unique perspective. They're actually using your services and they're seeing what they're meant to be. You have this whole picture of how it looks on the inside, and the customer doesn't have that. So they don't understand what goes into it, but they're giving you feedback and they're what keeps the light on at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, you bring up a great point of acknowledging the mess up, and then it's how do you handle it? Because, like you said, everybody makes mistakes. More importantly, is how do you handle it when you've made a mistake or a misstep or whatever you want to call it? I can share a story where we ordered a takeout from a restaurant, and they took the order. We drove down there, went down to pick it up, and no order. And showed them, dialed the phone number, the order never got made. So the manager came out to the restaurant and apologized and said, okay, we'll get it taken care of. And here, I'll buy you a beer while you wait. And so I felt, okay, so far so good. Comes back out 20 minutes later with the food. We checked the food. The order's wrong. It's for real. So he's all embarrassed. So he goes, I'm going to go back and personally watch it. So he goes back and comes back. We check it. And he goes, hang on a second. And he comes back and goes, here's a couple of cheesecakes for you guys as a dessert. Thank you. And I said, okay, what do I owe for the meal? He goes, nothing. We screwed this all up completely. And a matter of fact, on top of the comping us the meal, giving us a dessert, he gave us two of them, $5 discounts for both of us to come back to that place. And I'm a super fan of that restaurant. And we've gone back many times and we tell everybody we know because the food's great, the place is great. But the way he handled it was first class.
Yeah. Oh no, that really makes a difference. That's gonna stick with you. You're even telling me about the restaurant. I can imagine it was quite some time ago, and you became a super fan of that business because you were treated well. Imagine if that manager had acted defensive and just said, "Hey, you have to pay for this," and they just billed you, and then they billed you for the wrong food too on top of it. You'd be like the anti-fan, and I know sometimes, like when I get really angry, I leave bad reviews online. A review takes a lot of work for somebody to do. They have to remember their experience and they have to want to take time out of their day to share that with other people.
Yeah, we left a good review for the place. We didn't mention about the misstep or anything like that. We just basically said it was a great place and great service and they handle things appropriately. I think that was what we wrote. Something in a positive way, but I can appreciate that. So share a story with us, John. You mentioned one, but let's go into another story of where you got brought in and it was probably a multi-company or country, I should say, because I know that you work with companies that work with other countries, and there was some cultural challenges. And how did you kind of help bridge that?
So a lot of times, I mostly work with people who speak Spanish and Portuguese, Latin America, and sometimes Lusophone Africa and everything. I advise a company out in Mozambique. But in the Spanish and Portuguese speaking cultures, they're definitely less direct than we are as Americans. A lot of times today, even my wife says, "Oh, you just speak so harshly about things," but it's just our frankness, our directness as Americans that come across. And that's usually like the big stumbling block. When people meet things in Latin America, when they meet new people for the first time, there's always a little bit of chit chat, and you talk a little bit about the other person in their life and you ask them how they are. You might not necessarily care or anything, but it's just what is expected. You have to warm them up with the human connection first. Americans, a lot of times, they just like to get right down to business and they just start talking about the deal at hand. And a lot of times that leaves a bad taste in the Latin culture's mouths. And then on the flip side, too, there's a stereotype, there's Mexican time. And Americans use that as a way to express Spanish speakers moving slowly on a certain task, or they're just not showing up on time. There's a punctuality is another thing too that's quite a bit different. In the States, we say a time and we mean a time, but in Latin America, you can say a time and that's actually a 15 to 20-minute window. That's more in the personal context, but it's not professionally, people aren't generally punctual. It just depends also on their level of education and sophistication.
Sure. Yeah, you remind me of a story when I was in Japan, and I'm trying to get this master distributor signed up for our software product. And I went to the first trade show and was participated in their booth and was representing our product on their behalf. And they were very interested in becoming the master distributor. And then I came back a second time to meet with them and was just not getting any traction. I mean, they basically would nod, yes, okay, all is good. And I talked about the business potential and everything else. And I was down in Australia with my distributor just outside of Sydney, and we're on the beach at a restaurant. And I'm going, his name was Paul. I says, Paul, what am I doing wrong? You deal with the Japanese market all the time. What am I missing? Why can't I get this deal done? He goes, well, what are you talking about? I says, well, I'm talking about the business opportunity, the contracts, and the growth, and how they would become the master distributor and everything else, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, shut the heck up about all that stuff. He goes, start asking them about their culture and all the other aspects of that. So next time I went, I asked him, okay, where should I go visit? What are some things I should go see? And completely change the conversation. They came to our office in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we spent 2 hours in the office on the business stuff, and then the rest of the day I hopped in the car and drove them around all the valleys so they could see the cactus, take photos and everything else, and show them a bunch of cool stuff, and then dropped them off at the airport. And 2 months later, I got a $200,000 order signed and everything else, and they became one of my best distributors. But I had to, one, get myself out of my own way, and two, even though I was successful in Europe, the culture was completely different in the Asian market, especially in Japan. And I had to really flip my head on changing the way I was thinking and approaching the whole business.
That's a great point. People really love it when you acknowledge where they're from and little details about their life and everything. Here in Peru, especially, when I meet somebody new for the first time, I always speak in Spanish so they know that I speak their language and I have understanding. I'm not just a normal tourist. That's the first foot towards building trust. And then I mentioned something positive about the country. I have opinions already formed about the food and everything, but I always say the pollo a la brasa is the best thing here. The ceviche is good, but nothing beats the pollo a la brasa, which is like a rotisserie type chicken that they serve with French fries and mayonnaise. Yeah, a looser mayonnaise. It's not quite like American style mayonnaise, but it's absolutely delicious. And when most people hear Peru, they just think of the ceviche. And just by those two things, speaking in Spanish and mentioning a specific cultural detail, it makes people happy. I also got a hat that belongs to a more obscure local soccer team. And people just, they seem very happy when they see it. And people have approached me and they say, hey, are you like Sport Boys? That's the name of the team. They play out in Callao. And so these little advanced things that show appreciation for another culture, they go a long way towards building trust and getting positive outcomes in terms of business.
Yeah, and that's really the difference between being successful in operating internationally and not being successful, because of the fact that if you don't assimilate and respect, as you mentioned, the given cultures. Like I said, I was going no place fast in Japan because they were all acknowledging me everything that I wanted to hear, but they weren't taking any action because they're very polite. And I was stuck, couldn't understand why I was not making it. And that was because I was not adjusting myself to them, as we talked earlier.
That's super important too. One of the biggest things that I'd give as advice to any aspiring business professional is working on that ability to meet people where they are. You have to get down to their level and make them feel like you understand them. And that's how you get better results from people. Don't expect also that people are going to take time to understand where you're coming from, especially when you're dealing with like lower level employees. Like they don't understand the stress that it is to try to make payroll and you don't have enough money in the account, and so you have to dig into your own personal funds to make sure they can pay their family. You don't expect them to understand you, but it is your job as a business leader to understand them.
Yeah, and that's what stuff that you bring to the table with the companies that you work with, is helping them understand whoever they're dealing with and putting in systems and things in place to help them grow their businesses.
Oh, absolutely. One of the big things too that I do with my clients is I help them reframe their messaging. A lot of times the messaging in Spanish works one way, and that's fine for Spanish speakers, but if you're trying to talk to English speakers or Portuguese speakers, you need to make some fine-tuned adjustments to make sure that the messaging gets across as clearly as possible. And that improves outcomes substantially when you just start meeting people where they're at.
And you bring up an important point there, John, because messaging needs to resonate not only in the language, but the cultural aspect of it so that the person can connect with the message.
That's the most important thing when you're having a marketing campaign. You can have a winner in one language, but if you translate it, it's not always going to be as impactful. And it even changes as far as the country level. I had one client that was a microfinance firm and they were looking to get some lead generation done. And their target were to acquire new borrowers in Mexico and in Colombia. I made for them two different brands, and one brand performed much better in Mexico, and the other brand performed for them much better in Colombia. And it was that extra difference there, that extra attention to detail that made a better business outcome possible.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point there, and I want to make sure that our listeners understand that, because just because you translate something from English to Spanish or English to German or English to Polish or English to Japanese or English to Portuguese, that's just a direct translation, but it really may not, as you say, and I want to really emphasize that, really may not connect with the culture because it may be a literal, accurate translation, but the meaning is going to be very different based upon the cultural nuances.
I'd even say it applies to the greater English speaking world too, because I've had some campaigns where I've run them in the United States and Canada and in the UK. And the response rate in the United States and Canada was fairly consistent. Like it's pretty much the same market outside of Quebec where you have the francophones. But with the UK, they didn't respond as well to the American messaging. So we went back to the drawing board. We checked the spellings because they spelled color, armor, and center different. And we made sure that looked good. And we tested more headlines. We had a local British person also assist us with the campaign. And we were able to get it profitable, but it just took that extra bit of optimization. So even something as basic as going over to the UK where we understand people for everything 100%, the phrasing just ultimately matters.
Yeah, the phrasing is different. The spelling, as you mentioned, is different. And the choice of some of the slang that they use, because you can also incorporate slang into marketing just to make it fun and engaging, but it's completely different. Let's look at the UK, really. There's 3 different dialects of English in the UK. You've got England, you've got Ireland, and Scotland. And those are 3 completely different levels of English. And then you take the stuff and go to Australia, and that's completely different. And you take that down to New Zealand, and that's completely different. And then you go to South Africa, and that's completely different. And you go to the United States, and you go down south to Louisiana, and that's completely different.
That's true too. I mean, even when I'm doing some media buying campaigns for clients, we have to optimize on the state level. Certain states give you more volume and other states just more wasteful. So it even matters just on a local level. But another thing too is it's important not to get caught in the details and just focus on execution because you don't know unless you try. Sometimes over optimization just kills processes. What I like to shoot for is 85 to 90% there. Good enough is good enough. You're not going to have perfection. You're going to have bad days. Nothing is ever linear. It's always peaks and valleys.
Well, and I want to just kind of take that a little further too, John, is the fact that you can be continually refining it to get it to 100%. In the meantime, your competitor is at 82.5%. They got it out to market. They're gaining market share while you're still busy saying, well, the font isn't the right size just yet. And you get caught up into the stuff that's really unimportant at the end of the game. In the meantime, the competitor is already getting market share because they went forward. And then they can improve as they're going, but they're in the game already, where you're still on the sidelines because it's not 100% perfect.
I mean, with time too, people develop their own frameworks. But when I'm running an ad campaign, the first thing I look at is the headline and I optimize for that. Then I look at the image and then I optimize for that. And I pick one that performs reasonably well and generally keep the body text the same and I keep the button colors the same. And I just find what works at an acceptable rate. You're going to need to make 5 or 6 variations, but I'm not optimizing for things like font size or type of font. I just have general experience and I apply. And that's what I do for my clients too. I mean, the emails I send out for cold email campaigns, those are just plain text. I don't include a single image in that. Just focus on making sure the message is understood without being pretty. And ugly marketing performs really well.
Sure. Well, John, it's been a great conversation as we kind of come to the end here. How can people find you?
Well, you can reach out to me via my website, which is Fullest, PHOLUS.co. That's Fullest Advisory. That's my advisory firm. And I'm also on LinkedIn and I'm on Blue Sky too.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure that's in our show notes. Thank you so much for your time. Great conversation. Definitely would love to have you on the show and continue the conversation down another day.
Yep. Thank you for your time, Freddie. It's been a blast.
All right. Thank you.
John reminded us that growth gets dangerous when trust, communication, and internal safeguards don't keep pace with the business. That matters for service-based business owners because one misunderstanding, one weak process, or one leadership blind spot can turn into a much bigger problem fast. And that's exactly what I believe too. Sustainable growth comes from building trust and stability inside the business before you try to scale it outside the business. Know another service-based business owner who could benefit from this? Send them the link and help them get one superfan closer. If today's conversation got you thinking about where your business could be, not just this year, but 3 years from now, don't let it stop here. Too many service-based founders get stuck in feast or famine revenue, marketing that doesn't convert, and teams that depend on them for every decision. That's exactly why I share weekly insights from my own years of experience and from interviewing more than 200 guests on the show in my Prosperity Pathway newsletter. You can sign up for it at prosperitypathway.tips. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm grateful you're part of the Business Superfans movement. Every listen and every action brings you closer to building your own superfans. Be sure to subscribe to the show. We've got another great guest coming up that's going to drop some valuable insight. So I'll talk to you in the next episode. Remember, one action, one stakeholder, one superfan closer to lasting prosperity.
We hope you took away some useful knowledge from today's episode of the Business Superfans podcast. Join us on the next episode as we continue guiding you on your journey to achieve flourishing success in business.